going to talk about the changing landscape of payments. So please welcome Kshitij with a loud round of applause.
Thank you. Check. Good morning, everyone. Can I get a good morning from everyone? I thought everyone just had coffee. All right, great. Okay, so I hope the slides are visible to you. This first slide itself presents a very interesting thing that I want to get a quick pulse check in this room first. How many of you know that NPCI is a government organization? Quick show of hands. All right, that's roughly 60% saying we are a government organization, right? We are not, okay? So let's get that thing cleared upfront before that's the first question you ask me. All right. Next thing, how many of you have not used UPI in last 24 hours? Have not used. Okay. Fair enough. That's roughly 5% of the room not used. I'm sure maybe your family or friends would have used on your part, right? So I'm here today to discuss how the evolution has happened for digital payments infrastructure, particularly in the Indian space, and the kind of payment rails that we operate on day to day. So just a quick history of where we are at, right? So it all started back in 2008, right? When we took over as NPCI, the National Financial Switch, right? Then we moved on to launch IMPS. I'm sure a lot of you have either used it or heard it, Immediate Payment Services, right? Then you had the 2012 RuPay launch, which is basically an Indian card network to the likes of Visa and MasterCard, but more domestically designed. Yeah. Then the Jan Dhan Yojana got launched, and then we had that watershed moment of 2016, right? That 2016 particularly, it's very fond in our memories because of multiple reasons. First one being demonetization, right? Everybody is aware? Yep, quick show of hands. All right. Now, in addition to that, what all happens? There were two silent revolutions that started in India, right? Of course, the demonetization overnight, some of your currencies note became like a real monopoly note, right? Of no use at all. But at the same time, if you see, UPI got launched that year, right? And then at the same time, FASTag got launched in the same year, right? So from the overall next decade history of India, some very popular technology stack, the fundamental rails were getting in place without anyone's realization, which will define the future and where the country stands today, right? Then in 2018, of course, we saw some traction on the digital payments, and then we started to scale up the infrastructure that supports the UPI, so 2.0 version launched, right? 2019 is when the first time 1 billion transactions a month happened in the UPI rails, right? Then the internal Bheem app got launched, which is a generic app that we provide for all the UPI-based payments, right? The auto pay features, again 2 billion transactions a month, right? And then bunch of other features like UPI LiteX, Hello UPI, all these accessibility features got launched. And then just last month, any guesses how much transaction happened over the UPI network? I'm sure it's written over the slide, right? That we are looking at, guys, 20 billion transactions a month, right? It all started with 1 billion, maybe a million. Now we're looking at 20 billion as of August 2025. And I'm sure the festive season has just kicked in the country. Big billion days are coming very soon, and I'm sure we're going to scale this further up in the upcoming next 2 months, right? So we're looking at a scale that is unprecedented, right? In terms of any infrastructure, any digital services that country has seen, it has set the benchmark on how to build rails for the citizen scale, right? And not just build it, operate it reliably, and ensure it is up, right? So it has become so ubiquitous that it's like, electricity in your house, right? You don't realize it till the time the light is no more, right? And that is when the panic starts, right? So these are some of the numbers I wanted to quickly bring into perspectives, right? So currently, Google handles roughly, they claim 150,000 requests per second, right? Our servers at NPCI, they are, along with SSL and mutual TLS, we are looking at 240,000 requests per second, right? Then overall, per month, the world volume is 3 billion, right? The overall world population is roughly 8 billion, and as of just last month, we did 20 billion transactions, right? So this is just into perspective, the scale that we are talking about, right? Imagine if all these transactions were like a WhatsApp message coming to your family group. Imagine what will start to happen, right? It's going to get flooded, your app will get crashed, and like likewise, right? So the scale is massive, and so is the responsibility to maintain such systems, right? So these are again a quick few things, right? So we are currently number one in terms of processed value in the world, right? In terms of number of transactions processed in the world, right? Operating with 100% interoperability, the open banking, we have roughly 600 plus banks in the network, right? And not just right from the big merchants, the Reliance and Tatas of the world, to the small vendor out on the street selling pani puri for his living. Everybody is using UPI today, right? And that has contributed to the overall journey on how we as Indians take payments now. We see the payments as just another part, right? The moment your product becomes the verb, that means your product has really clicked in, right? So that's the stage we are at. So there are currently 600 plus banks, right? There are roughly 500 million plus users, right? And then there are 50 million plus merchants, right? By merchants, I mean all the shop owners and the business people that are there, right? 80% of the digital transactions is happening on the NPCI servers, and this is just not on UPI. We are talking about the host of products that we have, right? So it's UPI, it's Bheem, it's IMPS, it's Nash, it's your FASTag that you are using to pay on the toll gates, right? So everything revolves around that, right? So our servers during peak season, right, we are continuously getting load of 17,000 transactions per second, with the peak going almost 80% of it, which is roughly 24 to 25,000, right? The P99 latency that we guarantee is 100 milliseconds on the internal servers. There are live fraud detection ML models that run, which gets invoked in the critical path of transaction, and they return their inference within 75 milliseconds, right? And there are 4 active data centers that serves all these requests. We operate purely in active mode, and these are spread geographically across country at 4 regions, right? So, and it is all possible with the help of open source, with the help of technologies that are battle tested and continuously getting tested and stretched by our systems, right? So the bottom half of the slide, if you see, we are looking at bunch of open source products like, Yugabyte, Cassandra, KeyDB from the database, right? Kafka we are purely Ubuntu-based deployments, and then, the stack is primarily focused around Java and Spring Boot, but new services are coming up in Golang as well, right? So I want you to take you through the journey of how we evolved over the years, right? As I said, we launched in 2016 sometime. That was not the time when we were seeing a billion transactions. It took us a couple of years to reach even billion transactions. Then another 1 year to reach 2 billion, right? And then in the next span of 6 years, we are talking about 20 billion, right? So that's more than 10x of growth within a span of 6 to 7 years. What made that possible, right? The starting, of course, was humble. It was a straightforward because for us, even as a payment operator, we were operating as a black box, right? So here, what we are essentially looking at in any payment space, you have the banking, stack, right? And then the NPCI components, the switch comes in between, and then you have the settlement systems maintained and operated by RBI, and then there's a back office component, that continuously interacts, and which is maintained by NPCI but interacts with the banking and the RBI systems, right? So for us, initial beginning was reliance on full third-party managed solutions, right? We are just beginning, on our payment operator journey, and we really did not have much insight or control on the technology and scale that we envisioned that time to reach, right? So it all started with that, right? So we are only bothered at that time to be just the operator of the payment systems, right? So what next? Then with course of time, we started that, okay, no, we need to take things back in our control. Then that means we need to get into that builder mindset, right? Now, how do you start to do that, right? So it all started with us realizing that the systems cannot afford to go down anymore. So from the beginning, wherein we had just, let's say, one primary site, we started to have a maintained and active DR center as well, right? And then we started to need building of solutions and a platform mindset, right? And that is when, if you see, we try to replicate the setup on the DR site, and then at that time also, from relying on the third-party vendors, we started to move towards the licensed proprietary solutions, right? Because so that at least we get those licensed solutions and then start to operate and build using our own expertise, right? And then with continued on the same path, and then that is when we decided that okay, there's more that we can do, because clearly this solution will also not help us to scale, right? And that is when we came up internally to decide on the 4 design principles, starting with full total control over the code, right? So that means it is the current UPI code base that you have, it is purely indigenously developed, and we have the expertise internal to maintain and manage throughout the year, right? The benchmarking that we do starts at a population scale. It does not end there, because continuously we are seeing 30 to 40% growth month on month. That means we do not benchmark for a regular scenario. We foresee that end of the day, entire country will be going to use it time and again. So everything from scratch is designed with population scale at mind, right? At the same time, we treat security as our first-class citizen. That means right from the mobile app, the UPI app that you use, or any other applications that you have, there is a strong sense of security guardrails in place in terms of device fingerprinting, whitelisting some of the users and the apps, and the other back-end security techniques, right? And then, of course, everything is as much in memory as possible. So we are looking at a near zero RTO and RPO. That means if your transactions fail while being in flight because of some hardware issues, you might as well just restart and retry at any point in time without any fear of being in inconsistent state, right? So with these design principles, then we thought that, okay, let us reevaluate our entire approach to the payments infrastructure. And that is when we started to delve into moving away from licensed solutions now to purely open source, and building in-house capabilities in terms of maintaining Cassandra, managing Postgre, right? Using the open source Redis version on the Spring Boot side of the things, right? And then that's not just on the overall infrastructure. We started to increase our pace of innovation as well, because now we had more freedom to try out other parallel stacks as well, right? So how it helped us to scale with the open source adoption in place, right? So now if you see, this is the technology high-level architecture that we operate at, right? So we said that we are looking at a multi-site active deployments. Each data center now is eligible to completely serve the entire load. It starts with a WAF layer, which is the web application firewall, right? It goes to a load balancer and API gateways, and then you have the TPUs, your processing unit, and all your DBs are in memory primarily, and then you use a pub sub like Kafka to relay the information to your backend databases, which are responsible for back office operations, reporting, analytics, and other things, right? But the key message here is that process as much in memory as possible to avoid the typical system calls for the disk IO, right? And that continues to be our center point of architecture, wherein now it's to a level wherein we can keep on adding these boxes in different data centers, and we are able to scale horizontally, right? So overnight, when you see a surge and spike, and month on month we are growing 30 to 40%, that is possible because backend continuously we have the pattern to scale and without much further code change in that regard, right? So you're looking at an automated failover under 1 second, right? You have the embedded data storage in form of HSQL, right, for faster cache query, and the use of in-memory data store for as much possible for transactions, and write to the actual DB later on via these Kafka messages, right? The underlying data centers are also operated by us, wherein we maintain the DC communication through TDM, and the banks are directly connected to us via MPLS network connectivity and SD-WAN. So that ensures that you have a guaranteed line of communication, which is modular and fast enough to support the growing volumes that we are seeing. So we are already, let's say, looking at, as of last month, 20 billion, right? I'm sure over the next 2 to 3 months, we will be clocking 30 billion transactions, right? The moment we clock 30 billion, that means we are looking at 1 billion a day architecture, right? Now, the teams have already started to foresee that how do we now scale this up to a 10 bad architecture, which is 10 billion a day, right? So there are certain systemic level changes that will be required, that we foresee has to be done so that we are ready for the next generation payments infrastructure that the country needs right now to operate on that, right? So here I have just jotted down what all at high level, what all the evolution so far on the different architectural patterns, right? So starting with the architectural pattern, UPI 1 was purely monolithic, right? Currently a billion a day that is running, that is also primarily monolithic, but modular to support different product lines and the filter features, right? And then within 10 bad, we are looking at a layered architecture pattern where we want to segregate as much as possible, being closing towards the CQRS area wherein you want to define each layer, its role, and interact via the standard interfaces, right? From the communication protocol, we are looking for 1.0, it was primarily HTTP sync APIs, but for the 10 bad going forward in next couple of years, we are considering and actively testing the HTTP2 communications, which is more faster, allows multiplexing, right? So in the same connection, you are able to receive request and response, right? Because that's the way you would want to optimize things. From the API gateway standpoint, the initial launch versions did not use it. Currently, we are hosting an active gateways, but going forward, what we are looking at is consolidating the WAF, LB, and the gateway layers, because every time a new component is added, the hops keep on adding, and even a 10 millisecond latency has a direct impact on your user experience, right? So typically, the moment you do a UPI transaction, the moment even if it exceeds 2 seconds, you start to get worried, right? Because you are not used to that much delay. So for us at the back end, each and every millisecond is matter. And that is when we are realizing that maybe it's a good idea to consolidate these levels. Sorry, on the cache side now, we had initially a active passive setup. Currently for the local, we are using Redis, but on the global cache, we have a multi-master, multi-write setup of KeyDB, right? And then going forward, we continue with that on the KeyDB, but we are looking at off-heap cache as well to support our OLTP layer, right? Database, again, it started with Postgre. For back office, we are still using Postgre, but eventually the actual transaction data, in-flight data gets posted via Kafka to Cassandra, right? And then from there, we push it for the other databases as well, right? The idea is now to see and explore how do we remove DB altogether so that we don't need a DB call in the critical path of the transaction, right? See how best we can leverage the stream processing part and segregation depending on the characteristics of the data, right? On the HSMs, how many of you are aware what are HSMs here? Quick show of hands. Your passwords, your card data, your PIN, the CVV, right? All these are very secure and confidential data that does not get stored right away as a hash in your database, right? So banks and other people who are involved in the payments industry, they have to use hardware security modules to ensure this data is kind of hosted securely and retrieved at the pace that we are looking at, right? So HSMs were primarily more inclined towards hardware HSMs in the initial versions of UPI. Currently, we are using an active HSM, but going forward, what we're looking at is edge deployed HSMs, wherein you're looking at on the client side itself, your encryption will happen, and directly at the backend side, the decryption can happen. Not just that, there are studies going on how we can use encryption and decryption techniques at the kernel level as well, right? So there's continuous research that goes on within our teams to understand more on that. And then, of course, on the back office, right? If you remember the previous diagram, back office is important to ensure all the settlement files are getting generated correctly, because that is what gets reported to the regulator. So there is a separate tech stack that gets involved for back office and is equally important. Anyone from this room who has been involved in any kind of payments industry knows the importance of this. So till today, we are still in active passive mode, but we want to speed up the settlement times as well and ensure there is enough reliability. So that is when we are looking at an active setup in a 10 billion a day architecture that we're looking at. Yeah. So with that, so all this while we have been a heavy consumer of open source softwares, right? We are always trying to evaluate new softwares and see what works best for us. But that made us realize that we just cannot be consumers. We have to pay back to the community as well. And that started our efforts into the open source arena as well. So as part of our first contribution, we have a deployment helper by the name of Falcon. This is a Kubernetes-based deployment helper for Hyperledger Fabric-based blockchain networks. Traditionally, if any one of you has been exposed to this, it has been really quite a task to get a Fabric network up and running. But using this deployment helper, all from developers to professional enterprise teams can be up and running a production grade network within a span of 30 minutes while being natively on Kubernetes. So that is one of the contributions that we have made and has been widely accepted in the community as well. Going forward, there are more interesting frameworks that are in pipeline for us to open source. So yeah, please do look out for our repo for more details. Right, so I just wanted to conclude on the main takeaways that we foresee, operating at a citizen scale, right? In general, we are a strong supporter of open source first technologies. So we will always support and prioritize leveraging all the open source softwares as much as possible. We would want to remain available at all times. That means the thought process for any of your products should be always on. That means it is priority. You have to give priority on designing an active setup. That means how do you operate the same transaction or a cutover of the site in a seamless way in an automatic failover mode. The fail-safes, it's already being told out multiple times, extremely important as much as redundancy, right? The strict quality of service enforcement, right? And the zero trust and security by design, right? So that this is extremely crucial given the recent attacks on the cybersecurity side, right? We have to ensure that the security is a first-class citizen of your design, and you have given sufficient thought on how the overall framework around security is monitored, right? And then the last probably thing is the standardization of specification, right? If you foresee why the single major reason why UPI has been adopted and other of the products is because they have standardized the scattered specification that was out there in the market. So the more common specs or standardized specs that we can bring in and introduce it to the community is more than willing to adopt and start to comply and improve it further. All right, so that's about my time on this presentation. I hope you had something to learn, something to take away. And feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm available outside of this room as well. Thank you.